In search of you, my darling, I would scale the highest clouds, scour wooded valleys, roaring torrents, whispering gales. First regarded me, your eyes filled me with grace. Fade by again my eyes, merit to adore you. I have come with one purpose, to capture for myself a bride. By my life she is lovely, and by my death she's justified. I have always been her husband, though many lovers she has love me, you will love the church. Oh, and I have long pursued her as an harlot and a whore. Yes, but she will feast upon me. She will drink and thirst no more. So when you taste my flesh and my blood, you will know that you're not alone. 'Cause I haven't come for only you, but for my people to pursue. And you cannot care for me with no regard for her. If you love me, you will love the church.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today is new creation. A return to what God started with. A beautiful redemption that began with water at creation and that continued into the cleansing, washing water that we see today. What a beautiful witness, testimony today of love. An unfailing, relentless love that knows no boundaries. A love that makes all things new, all things beautiful. A love that cleans us up. A love that washes us. And a love that cannot be put away. Today we witness new creation. Would you turn and face our audience? Ladies and gentlemen, what you have seen today is a portrait of our story. And it is with my great pleasure to reintroduce to you the story of our lives, the love story that we all find ourselves in. The story that is more like falling in love. So I present to you today brand new creation.
It's gotta be more like falling in love. There's something to believe in. More like losing my heart than giving my allegiance. Cold out, come take a look at me now. It's like I'm falling. Oh, it's like I'm falling in give me words, I'll misuse them.
So again, what you've seen last night and today is the story of our lives. This is the story that we all find ourselves in. And it gets very personal when we watch the scene unfold, because just like last night when we watched the rejection, and we can all relate to that moment when we turned our hearts away. And I asked you the question last night, how could she leave him at the altar and dance away with another lover? And the question is the same for us. How could we? How can we turn our hearts away from a God who loves us so much, who breathed life into us, who gave us freedom, who gave us life, who gave us so many wonderful things? And as we all witnessed, that even though we have experienced this story, we've rejected him, we've gone up the aisle, we have said, we've all been runaway brides, haven't we, in some way or another. And yet, no matter how far we go, he is always pursuing us. One of the things that is moving to me as I watch this unfold is to see the heartbroken Jesus who goes out and pursues. Go back with me to the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve garden and have broken the only rule that God has given them. They've chosen another story. God is searching for them. He is pursuing them in the garden. He is walking in the garden looking for His creation, wondering, where have you gone? Because you are my first love. I love you, and I still love you. But as we know with the fall of mankind, there was a price to be paid. And God was willing to do whatever it would take to come back and to pursue us. And so no matter who you are here today, God has pursued you. He's been after you. And maybe for the first time, even this weekend, you're starting to think about, what does God mean to me? Who is this Jesus who's been after me, who's been pursuing me? And I don't mean He's been after you like creepy after you. He's been after you because He loves you. He's been pursuing you so that He can love you. He's been watching the story of your life unfold, the story that He created for you. And He's been walking right beside you through your good times, through your bad times. And He's been there to pick you up when you fall. And no matter how far away you have separated yourself from Him, one of the beautiful things that Paul writes, he says, nothing can separate us from the love that is in Christ Jesus. Nothing can push Him so far away that we can never return. There's a beautiful story you probably heard most of your lives, this story of the prodigal son who completely rejects his father, who goes to a whole other land and spends all of his father's inheritance and completely shames his family. And yet, when that son hits rock bottom and decides that I have nowhere else to turn, there's nowhere else to go, he comes back to the town where he's from, and he begins to make those very difficult steps back into the road that leads him to his home, wondering, what will my father think of me? What will my father do when he sees how far I've fallen, how bad I am, how shameful I am? And the beauty of the story is that when the father looks out and he sees his son from afar, imagine this old man, this old father, and he's all dressed in his robes. And he looks out and he spots this son who has left home, who has rejected him, who spent all of his money. In the parable that Jesus tells, the father takes off running towards the son. He runs out to greet him, to let him know, you've not gone too far. There's no distance that you could ever go that would keep me from loving you. And the father still pursues his son, even when he's rejected. But he doesn't just end there. He brings his son back. He accepts him back into the family. He puts a ring on his finger. He clothes him again. And then he throws a party for him. A great banquet. And he says, we're going to celebrate. My son who has gone away is back. He's home again. And the father rejoices because the son who was lost is now found. I don't know how this wedding language that we've been talking about speaks to you, but one of the greatest symbols I mentioned last night in the Bible is wedding imagery. And this isn't just for the ladies. This is for the guys in here too. And that is the image that we are the bride of Christ. That we're not just going through the motions. We don't just show up to church on Sunday morning and maybe go to retreat or go to church on Wednesday night because we have to, because we better follow the rules. No, we do that because we get to. One thing I've enjoyed seeing with you guys is that you seem to really enjoy being together. You love hanging out. And we felt really welcome just being in this short time we've been here, really welcomed with you because of the ways that you have just delighted in being together. You have fun being together. No one probably made you come here. You wanted to, right? You got to come here. And that's the way it is with following Jesus. We get to. It's a joy. It's a beauty that we get to do. And so it's really just more like falling in love. When I fell in love with what is now my wife, I didn't have to analyze it. I didn't have to think through all the rules. It came rather naturally. I fell in love with her. And I chose to marry her. And I chose to spend my life with her, not because I had to, but because I got to. And that's the way it is with Jesus. He comes to all of us, even at our worst point, and he says, I want to spend my life with you. I choose you. When you hear those words this morning, I choose you. And I would imagine, probably for all of us, we've been rejected in some way or another. Maybe someone said something bad about us at school, or maybe you felt the pain of some kind of being stabbed in the back, or somebody just wasn't kind to you. We all know what it's like to not be chosen. And no matter who you are, Jesus comes to you and says, I choose you. Will you be in a relationship with me? I choose you. Will you accept me? But you know, love for all of us is never forced. He never forces himself on us. He never makes us love him. All the way back in the beginning, love was a free will choice. Some people say, well, why in the world did God give them a choice? Like, why in the garden did he put a tree of life and then a tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Why not just eliminate that possibility? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because love that is not chosen is not true love. You see, God could have made Adam and Eve kind of robots and just said, I'm going to program you to love me. I'm just going to program it into your DNA that you have to love me. There is no other choice. And they could have walked around, almost like robots saying, I love God, I love God, I love God. But God wanted a choice. He wanted people, his people, to choose. How strange would it be today in our loving relationships if you were forced to love someone? There's nothing really. People can make you do a lot of things, but they cannot force you to love someone. When all of the Jews in World War II were in concentration camps, the Nazis could make them do a lot of things. They could force them into some very cruel punishment. They could force them to do all kinds of evil to them. They could force them into gas chambers. The one thing that the Nazis could not force those Jews to do? They couldn't force them to love them back. And that's the way it is with God. He doesn't force you to love him. He says, I choose you, but will you choose me? And let's make no mistake, we all have the choice to walk away. We all have the choice to look him in the face and say, no, I choose something other than you. Jesus said sin, that's what sin is. When we sin, he said we're a slave to that sin. We're following the devil when we sin. It's not just, oh well, broke a rule. When we sin, we've just given our heart away to something other than God. Listen to the words of John chapter 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled, Jesus said. So he says this to his beloved disciples. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust, he said, in God. Trust also in me. Because he says, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. And listen to what he says next. He says, I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go prepare a place for you, I'll come back. And I'll take you to be with me, that you may also know where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. Now you may have heard it in this language. But what Jesus just did with his disciples was propose to them. He just offered them an invitation to life. Essentially, he just said, will you marry me? Will you be my bride? Because the language he uses is just like the language they used during his time about what a groom would do, what a young man would do when he wanted to marry a young lady. What he would do was this. He would first go to the young lady's father, and he would ask for her hand in marriage. And then the two fathers would get together and they would negotiate a bride price. There has to be something that the father of the bride is willing to sacrifice, willing to give. And so they would agree, this is the dowry, this is the wedding price, this is what I will pay you for you to take my daughter in marriage. And so what they would do would be agree on that. And then oftentimes what they would do would be, and this would sound crazy to us today, they would take some animals and cut those animals in half, and they would form a blood pool or a blood path. And those two fathers would take off their shoes and they would walk through the blood as a way of saying to each other, this is a blood covenant. And if my son or my daughter does not keep their marriage covenant, then this is what you can do to me. I've heard it said that even today in some very strict Jewish religious parts of their culture, that some fathers still do this. And if there's an unfaithful bride, unfaithful daughter, that you might find her father, not her, but her father, dead in a ditch somewhere because his daughter is not keeping covenant. And so you have these fathers who come together, they agree upon a price, and then they would pour a cup of wine. And they would each take that cup of wine, and they would take it to their lips, and they would drink it. And they would seal the agreement. So they sealed it in blood, and then they seal it symbolically again in blood as they drink the cup together. Shake hands, and the deal is now arranged. Your daughter can marry my son. And so the son would then go and begin preparing a place for his bride to be. He would go back to the town where he's from. He would go back to his father's house. And he would begin building a room onto his father's house. Sometimes it would take months, even up to a year, to build a room onto the father's house. During this time, the bride-to-be would wait very patiently. And this would sound crazy for us today because, ladies, maybe you're thinking ahead to one day what it would be like as maybe you're engaged and you start thinking of all the wedding preparations that you will make. And all the arrangements that go into that, and all the planning. Well, in the first century, in the image that Jesus is sharing with us, first century brides-to-be would go back to the village, and they'd go back to normal, what they were doing, and they would simply have to wait. And while they waited, they worked, and they kept their house in order. Because they never knew when the groom was going to come back to get them. But they had to be ready. Because when he finished working on the house that they were going to live in his father's home, it was ready. It was time to go back to the village where his bride-to-be was. And so, he would take some of his friends and say, it's time. It's time to go get her. And to bring her back. And so, unannounced, the friends would go with the groom into the village of where the bride was. And they would take the horn of a ram, it was called a shofar, and very loudly and deliberately, as they carried in their torches, and as they carried in their shofars, when the signal was given, they would blow the sound of the trumpet in the village. And everyone would know, he's back. He's here. It's time to celebrate. The bride came to the middle of the night. Hopefully the groom wouldn't do that to her. But whatever she was doing, she would stop and she would know that he's here. He's back and he's going to take me home. And so she would know this was the moment she had waited for. And she would come and she would meet her new husband. And together, they would go back to his father's house. And they would begin a life together. Listen again to the words of Jesus. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I wouldn't have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And I will come back. And I will take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You see, we all know that he has proposed to us and that he will come back. And when he comes back, he will find us as his bride, and he will take us home. What you came in with today is a symbol, though, of the fallen world that we live in. Take out your black coat. Hold that in your hand for just a minute. You see, we all know the sting of sin. We've all felt it before, every one of us. We know what it's like. Even though we have high hopes for Jesus to come back one day, and we talk about that so excited, like, yeah, I just wish he'd come back right now. I just wish today Jesus would come back and take us all home and just end all of this difficulty in this world. But oftentimes we kind of forget that he's coming back, don't we? We kind of forget that he's proposed to us. And we get real distracted very easily. And we forget that given us as His children, as His bride. And that He's going to come back and clean us up. But we start to get distracted. Take a look at the black rose. And we start to think of ourselves as unworthy. We start to think of ourselves as simply just fallen human beings, just nothing but a sinner. I'm just nothing worthy of God's love. And yet, in our worst moment, He comes to us and says, I want to make something beautiful, even out of your worst fallen state. Even in your weakness, He is strong. The Apostle Paul says, in my weakest, He's strongest. Where I am weak, He is strong. In a wedding, even as you heard what we did last night, physically before a preacher and an audience and family and friends, the bride and groom will make a vow to each other. I've had the privilege in my years working in youth ministry of standing here in this place with a bride and a groom and working with a bride and groom to write out their wedding vows. There's really nothing more beautiful, especially when it's been a student that I had in my youth group that I got to stand on the stage with and watch them give their life to a young man or a young woman to pledge their lives to. But those vows that they say here are more than just words, aren't they? They're actually a commitment. They're a vow. They're a covenant. They're a blood covenant. You're saying, with all of my heart, with all of my life, I give you this vow, and I pledge my life to you. I'm going to give you an opportunity over the next couple of minutes. Hang on to your black rose. I want you to reach under your seat. You should find an index card and a pencil or pen. And we were short on pencils and pens, so you may need to share. So I think we put them every other seat. I'm going to ask you for a moment to think about what vow or promise or pledge you might need to make to God right now. Typically at the altar, a bride or a groom will say, I promise to love you through good times, through bad times. Or I promise to, in sickness and health, and plenty and in want. You make these set of vows. A lot of you have already made that covenant with Jesus. You've already entered the waters of baptism, and you've given Him your life, and you've said, I do to Him. Right there at the moment. And yet you know what it's like to reject Him and go the other way. For some of you, you might want to write a vow saying, God, I want to love you. And I want to consider and giving my life to you. I want to say I do to you. For some of you that are thinking about giving your life to Him fully for the first time, this might be a place where you just write a note to God. God, I want to know you more. Will you help me in that? For others of you, this might be a time that you need to think about what's it like to be that bride who just completely walked up the aisle and rejected Jesus. I hope that you were stirred or moved when you saw her come back down the aisle and you saw that even though she felt so unworthy holding those black roses and dressed in filth, she felt so unworthy to come back. And what did you see Jesus do? Jesus pursues her. And even when Satan continues to pursue, Jesus says, no way. She's mine. And that's what He says to you. No matter how far you've gone, no matter what you've done, what you've been through, Jesus says you're mine. And you can never stray too far from my love. Won't you come back and experience that love? Won't you come back and let me clean you up and make beautiful things of your life? Because that's what I desire for you. You see, He desires to make something beautiful of your life, even from the ashes. I love the image of what we saw of Jesus coming and not only taking off the veil, but replacing it with a new one. Not only cleaning up, but washing deeply. This image you saw was an image of our baptism. It was an image of how we are washed and we are cleansed when we are immersed. And then Jesus raises us up to new life and says, I want to dance with you. I want you to experience life the way that I intended it, the beauty of it. And I want you to come and live with me forever. Maybe you need to make a vow, a recommitment, or a repledge to God. We're going to play a song. The song is one you've probably heard. It's called Beautiful Things. What kind of vow or pledge do you need to make to God right now? Maybe you just need to say, God, I've gone astray this way, and I need to do this better. Maybe you need to make some new commitments, covenants to God. Even though you probably have already stood in the water and said I do to Him, in what ways do you need to come back to Him? In what ways do you need to stand in that water, not the water of baptism, but that water of being cleaned up, where His blood comes in and washes you? We're going to play this song over the next few minutes. I'm just going to invite you to write on your card some vow or pledge. Now, there's another way we're going to invite you to do this too. Maybe right now you're in a pretty good place. You feel like as though you're pursuing God with all your heart. And you really, while none of us are perfect, you might feel like right now I'm in a deeply loving place with Jesus. And I can relate more now to the dance than to the rejection. So maybe right now your pledge or your vow is even for someone else. Maybe guys, you need to write a vow to help protect the young ladies in here. Maybe you need to write a vow that says, God, help me to protect these young ladies. Help me to protect their purity and their innocence. Help me to see them as not as objects, but as beautiful creations to be guarded and protected. Young ladies, maybe you need to make a commitment to the guys. Maybe you need to say, God, help me to protect these guys as they go out and try to be men of purity and integrity. Help me to even keep myself pure, the way that I dress, the way that I look, so to not tempt them. Help me to be pure in heart, to help show them, to guard their heart. And so maybe some of the vows you might want to make are to each other. You're going to have an opportunity in just a moment to stand up and to share these if you choose. No one will have to, and if no one does, that's okay too. But as you write something, I want you to consider writing something you might be willing to stand up from your chair and to simply share, this is my vow. So you may want to write it poetically. You may want to write it as a vow and just say, this is my vow today. This is my pledge to God today. This is my commitment, whether it be directly to God or to someone else in this room. So as we play this song, we'll give you about 5 minutes as this song plays. Consider the vow, the pledge that you might write before God. Let's go ahead and begin to do that.